The hook: the United States military is the raid boss of Earth. It has held the title of the world's strongest force for decades, and that isn't changing anytime soon. But let's break reality for a second. Let us ignore politics and economics and ask the ultimate wargame question. What is the minimum force required to successfully invade, occupy, and conquer the entire United States today? To visualize this, we are going to model a hypothetical enemy using modern Chinese equipment, launching from present-day China. Now, disclaimer, today's China is nowhere near strong enough to do this, but we're reusing their tech as a baseline to calculate the insane multipliers needed to pull this off. So, buckle up. The Pacific Gauntlet: the objective is total conquest, defeating 340 million Americans, plus potential reinforcements from Canada and Mexico. The nightmare starts in the water. An enemy launching from China needs a navy massive enough to smash into the Pacific, crush US bases, and keep allies like Japan too terrified to intervene. Later, that same fleet has to ferry millions of troops to the US mainland. We aren't simulating nukes here, just conventional chaos. The US Navy currently operates over 80 destroyers, 11 supercarriers, and 50 attack subs. But the real king of the Pacific is air power. The US has roughly 3,000 tactical combat jets. In a defensive war, these jets, combined with Patriot missile batteries and destroyers, form an impenetrable blue wall. The numbers game: to break this wall, the invader needs a force that doesn't exist yet. Modeling on Chinese tech, you would need over 100 Type 93B nuclear attack submarines, roughly equivalent to early US Virginia-class subs, just to put the US Navy on the defensive. Then, you need to clear the skies. This 1-to-1 ratio isn't about fair fights. It accounts for the attacker's long flight times versus the US defender's home field advantage. The retreat and the carrier problem: as the initial clash ends, the US would likely retreat to Fortress America positions, the Mariana Islands, Alaska, and Hawaii. This creates a logistical hell for the attacker. Suddenly, your 3,000 jets have nowhere to land. The enemy would have to island hop across the Pacific, turning tiny atolls into airstrips. To keep those 3,000 fighters in the fight without islands, you would need a fleet of 50 supercarriers. Is that doable? In a limitless scenario, yes, but it's wildly inefficient. A smarter move requires a mix of carriers and massive long-range missile barges. But to hit targets from that far away, you need eyes in the sky. The surveillance state information wins wars. To track every US ship and base with a 30-minute refresh rate, the attacker needs a constellation of 3,000 high-res radar satellites. That is 50 times the size of China's current fleet. You can't just shoot these down without creating a debris field that destroys space for everyone. And you can't analyze that much data with humans. You need an AI-driven targeting system, similar to the US Project Maven, to coordinate thousands of strikes per hour. Ironically, launching 3,000 satellites is easier than building 50 aircraft carriers. The missile storm, but you still need brute force. To lock the US Air Force into the western US, the attacker needs to unleash a missile storm, roughly 10,000 long-range missiles in the first month alone. The total requirement? It sounds impossible, but nations like Russia have ramped up production mid-war before. A China-like industrial superpower could theoretically reach these numbers. With the US Navy retreating, the attacker moves to the mid-Pacific. They would need 150 air defense destroyers to protect their fleet, more than the US and China currently have combined. The invasion: Alaska and Hawaii now, the map changes. Hawaii falls first, blockaded, bombed, and swarmed by hundreds of thousands of troops. Southeastern Alaska is next. The grip slips, first the Aleutians, then the Kenai Peninsula. But landing on the US mainland? A direct beach landing requires a force 10 times larger than D-Day. And D-Day was a 100-mile trip. This is an ocean crossing. The North and South Gateway to survive. The attacker can't just hit California. They have to expand the front. The logical, albeit brutal, move is to invade via Canada and Mexico. Neither neighbor has the military to stop a superpower invasion force, which forces the US to stretch its defenses north and south. Staging grounds would be set up in Baja California and Vancouver Island. The attacker uses a stepping stone strategy. First Hawaii, then Alaska, then the border regions. Even with this strategy, the casualties would be horrific. We are talking staggering losses for the invader. But once beachheads are secured, a massive two-pronged push squeezes the US west coast from the north and south. The grind: Ukraine on steroids. If US air power is neutralized, the war for the mainland looks like a gigantic version of Ukraine. The US Army is well equipped, but how big does the attacking army need to be to win? Let's look at the math. Ukraine mobilized about 2.5% of its population to hold off Russia. If the US does the same, that's 9 million American troops. Some argue Americans are too individualistic to draft that many people. But facing an invasion, let's assume the US rallies. To beat 9 million defenders, history suggests the attacker needs a 20 million strong army. The World War II scenario, but what if the US goes full World War II mode? Back then, the US mobilized 11.5% of the population. Today, that equals nearly 40 million troops. To conquer a force that size, the invader needs to field 60 to 80 million soldiers. For context, 11.5% of China's current population is 160 million, so the manpower exists. But sustaining a force of 80 million across an ocean? It implies a messy, chaotic, multi-year war where the invader has to cannibalize US resources just to keep their army from starving. The endgame, as the West Coast falls, the Rocky Mountains become the new front line, channeling US counterattacks. This phase would last years. Millions would die. And even if the conventional US military shatters, you face the Red Dawn factor. Widespread US gun ownership means a never-ending guerrilla insurgency behind enemy lines, bleeding the occupier dry. The verdict so, what is the minimum force to conquer America? You need an army 30 times larger than China's current force, an air force with 5 times the number of 5th-generation fighters, a navy with 10 times the nuclear subs and carriers, and a satellite network that blots out the sun. Building the equipment is theoretically possible. Sustaining the logistics is almost unimaginable. In the real world, the US would spend decades destroying the economy of anyone attempting this buildup. The reality is simple. If the US is ever conquered, it won't be by an invasion fleet. It will likely be preceded by a civil war that fractures the nation from within. But as long as the United States remains united, it is geographically and militarily unconquerable.